We were talking about commander and chief. Commander, what? In chief. Okay. So I told you about the precedent that President Jefferson set. Yes, against the Barbary Pirates. Guys, it's kind of interesting. I didn't really plan on coming in and doing Muslim bashing, but these pirates were Muslims, okay? And Jefferson and his diplomats, like said to them, to these pirates, he's like, what gives you the right to do this, to take these hostages and use them as bait? And they said, well, under our religion, we have the right to do this. You are not Muslims. You are infidels. So we can take you as slaves. It's in the Quran. Okay? So Jefferson recognized this very early on. Okay? And if you study Jefferson and his views on religion and so forth, he studied Islam. He studied Christianity. Okay? The more I learn about Jefferson, probably the less I like him, but, you know, he's still a pretty great dude, guy. But anyhow, that was a big deal and a precursor of, you know, our conflicts with Muslim nations in more recent years. Okay. Now, so commander-in-chief. Now, during the Vietnam War, we will talk about later this week in history. President Johnson asked for what was called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964 to send troops to Vietnam, offensive troops. We had some troops already in Vietnam training the South Vietnamese how to fight against the communists. Okay, and so after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, we start sending troops. That was 1965. And this war drug on. It became our longest war. And we didn't declare war. And so Congress said, you know what? We ought to put some limits on the commander-in-chief as far as being able to use the armed forces wherever, whenever, however he wants. So they passed in 1972 the War Powers Act, of 1972, which said the president can still use the armed forces wherever, whenever, however. Okay, he's got 60 days. After 60 days, Congress has to approve this action. If Congress doesn't approve this action, he's got 30 days to bring the boys home. Boys and girls home. Okay? So essentially, the president has 90 days. Does that make sense? That is the only restriction on the president. Okay? So let's talk Afghanistan, which was a 20-year war. Okay? Did Congress approve the action? Now, that encompassed, let's see, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, 4 presidents. Vietnam, I mean, the conflict there will encompass 5 American presidents. Okay? So, yes, Congress did approve the action in Afghanistan. Congress did approve the action in Iraq when we went there in 2003. Okay? But no declaration of war by Congress. Good? Okay. So you understand the powers of the commander-in-chief. And all of our commanders-in-chief in modern history have used this power. Okay? Chief legislator. All right, so we guys know what legislation is. We just talked about that branch. Okay? The president can't submit legislation, but he can encourage it. Yes? So every January, the president gives the State of the Union address. I think I told you this. If the president is popular, okay, he is going to sway Congress to go with him. Okay, if the president is not popular, doesn't have a lot of power, Congress doesn't really listen to the president. Okay, now the president is the president. Now, have any of you ever gotten a phone call from the president of the United States? Anybody ever gotten that call like, please hold, the president of the United States is on the phone, would like to speak to you? No, I haven't either, unfortunately. Okay, or fortunately, I don't know. Okay. But if you get that call and your name is Ron Estes, you're sitting in your office one day, okay, and your administrative assistant, not your secretary, your administrative assistant rings into your office and says, Mr. Estes, the president of the United States is on the phone. I'd like to speak to you. What? Yeah, it's Joe Biden. Okay? Estes is a Republican. It doesn't matter. Ron Estes has never gotten that phone call before from the president of the United States. Okay, so he picks up the phone, Mr. President. How are you? Mr. Estes, how are you, Representative? Listen, the King Charles is coming in for a state dinner this weekend. How would you and your wife like to join the First Lady and I and sit at the head table with the King? Well, Mr. President, that's very kind of you. Yes, we very much enjoy that. So what is President Biden doing? Because Biden's going to ask him for something next week. He's going to call back and say, hey, did you enjoy your time? Dinner was great. Yeah, the lobster. Oh, yeah, that was fabulous. The prime rib. Oh, yeah. Now, this bill is going through Congress, through the House. I really need funding for the Ukraine. Can I count on your support? This is the type of thing the president can do. Okay, he can impact individual legislators, okay, by currying favor with them, or calling them and saying, "Listen, I know you just introduced a bill. I kind of like it. If you'll throw your support behind my legislation, I'll throw my support behind yours." Okay, so presidents can have a lot of sway this way. It does really matter whether they're popular. You know what I mean? Okay, like how does Reagan get one of the biggest tax cuts in American history through a Democratic Senate? Well, because he won 49 states. And the people wanted the tax cut. Okay. All right. Good. Chief citizen. Now, this is probably the hardest one to kind of define because you have chief of state or head of state. So this more is a cultural thing. Okay. So if you go back, does anybody know what administration was referred to as Camelot? Huh? Yeah. You remember which one? JFK administration. Camelot. Okay. The love affair with the Kennedy family. Okay. John F. Kennedy, beautiful wife, right? Jackie Kennedy. And then they had all the kids. It's cool to see little children running around the White House. It's just kind of neat. Okay. Jimmy Carter had a young daughter. They kept her out of the public eye. Okay. She was, she kind of looked like, the Wendy's. Oh. They kind of kept her out of the public. But the Kennedy kids, they were just they're darlings. Okay, and Jackie was beautiful, and Jackie wore these cool hats, and so pretty soon everybody's wearing these cool hats that Jackie wears, the fashion, the different things. Now, first ladies often have kind of like a cause, like Michelle Obama's was like. 60 minutes of exercise a day, childhood obesity, this sort of thing. Laura Bush was a librarian, so she was, really big about reading for kids. Nancy Reagan, just say no to what? Drugs. Okay, so they all have their little thing, and so this is kind of a cultural thing. So the first family, that's kind of your first citizen. So some cultural different things like that, kind of simple, okay? Good? You get it? Yeah. All right. And then chief of party. And we talked about this when we talked about political parties. We know that Ronna Romney McDaniel is the head of the Republican Party. Who is the head of the Democratic Party? Joe Biden is the head of the Democratic Party, not Jamie Harrison. Jamie Harrison is the chair of the DNC, but Biden is the head of the party. Okay, so if the president is in power, okay. Now, right now, if you are a Democrat that's running for Congress, do you want Joe Biden to come in and campaign for you? Probably not. Okay, because he's not real popular. Now, if he was real popular, you'd be like, everybody be calling Biden, hey, come campaign. I'm in a tight election. Will you please come campaign with me? Okay, so like some Republicans that, you know, if you're in the 1st district of Kansas or the 4th district of Kansas, like, hey, Trump, will you come talk? You know, some Republicans want Trump to come, some don't. You know, if you're in a purple district that's very divided, you may not want Trump to come. Okay, and this happens from time to time. I remember, you guys, we're gonna track. Oh, I'm down 10%. Okay, Dustin, do you know who Jim Ryan was? Who was Jim Ryan? First high schooler to break 4-minute mile. What high school did he go to? Wichita East High School. Like world famous Jim Ryan. He ran for Congress. He was in Congress. He was up near the Kansas City area. He didn't represent the 4th district down here. Okay, he lived up Overland Park or somewhere up there. Okay, in 2006, he was running for re-election, and he asked George Bush to come in and campaign for him. Well, in 2006, George Bush was not popular, and the Iraq War was unpopular, and Jim Ryan lost his seat in Congress, and he had Bush come in for him. Okay, so sometimes you want the president, sometimes you don't. Appreciate the offer, President Biden. We're going to pass. That sort of thing. Okay, so there's your chief of party. Good. Now you guys can do that assignment on page 84, which is the matching assignment. Okay, I put up 3 assignments yesterday. 2 worth 16, 1 worth 13. That's 26 plus 13. That's 39 points. Who needs it? Okay, then do it. If you don't need it, don't do it. I don't have to grade it. Okay, taking in interviews tomorrow. Or Thursday. No, I didn't scare you. Thursday. All right. Mr. Ebright has no grading right now, but is about to have a lot of grading. All right, so let's talk about the vice president. All right, so there are no qualifications to be vice president, unlike the president. Now, would any sane presidential candidate choose a vice president that did not meet the qualifications for the presidency? No, because they wouldn't get elected, because like you're really stupid to elect to choose somebody to run with you that's not qualified. So it's not going to happen. Could it happen? Yes. No qualifications. You don't even have to be a U.S. citizen, okay, to be the vice president. There's no qualifications. Stop. Okay. Now, 1 in 5 vice presidents have become president by succession. 1 in 3 vice presidents have gone on to be later elected, like our current president. Yes? Now, you see that little thing about the Indian curse? You know about this? No, Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. Who is Tippecanoe? William Henry Harrison, the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. Harrison. 1840. He defeated Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Remember this? He runs for president. Elected in 1840. He takes office on March 4th. He gives his inaugural address. And then what happens? He gets sick and dies. He's like president for 30 days. Dies in office. Who was elected in 1860? Who was elected in 1860? Angelina. Emily. Lincoln.
Oh, shoot.
Mr. Ebright, I was going to say Lincoln. Listen. What happened to him? He got shot. 1880. Garfield. Dies in office. 1900. William McKinley. What happened to him? He got shot. 1920. Warren G. Harding of Ohio. Dies in large heart, got pneumonia, dies. 1940. FDR. Dies of a brain aneurysm. 1960. Who's that? JFK. What happened to him? He got shot. 1980. Who got elected? Ronald Reagan. What happened to him? He got shot. But he survived. He broke the curse. He's more than a president, more than an actor. He's more than a governor. Legend. Way better than Bill Clinton. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Okay. So every other president, both Bush and Biden, elected in 2020 now, has survived presidency because of Reagan. All right. The only official duty of the vice president is to be there in case the president dies, which is not an official duty, and be president of the Senate. Okay. The vice president can preside over the Senate anytime they want. It rarely happens. It's up to the discretion of the president, how much power they have. So what does Kamala actually do? She's in charge of the border. Poor woman. Okay. Yeah. So really, what do they do? John Adams said, as vice president, I am nothing. But I could be everything. And then John Garner, that first Roosevelt vice president, said the vice presidency isn't worth a warm pitcher of spit. He was a cowboy wearing Texan that did chew tobacco. And so he said, it ain't worth a warm pitcher of spit, this job. And he was only vice president for one term. Okay. Then Roosevelt picked the communist. Okay, we'll talk about that later.
So,
what was his name? The second one? Henry A. Wallace.
I swear I was going to say that.
Mr. Ebright? I was going to say Wallace. And his third vice president? Third vice president? Drop the bomb.
Oh, true.
Truman.
so
He had three different vice presidents.
is vice president kind of like the best job ever?
It's a pretty good gig. Pays $23,500.
Don't do anything.
$223,500.
Where does the vice president live?
They have a house across the street from the White House.
Is it blue?
It's called the Blair. Is it the Blair House?
Is it nice?
Huh?
Do they get like their tours and stuff?
It's not as nice as that. Okay. Now, why do we pick certain people to run for vice president? We've talked about this, I think. Could be geography, could be political, like one's a conservative, one's a moderate, and vice versa. One's liberal, one's moderate, these sorts of things. Geography is a big one if you look historically. Okay, and now I think race and gender is starting to play a little bit of a role there as well. Okay, 25th Amendment. So The vice president has to be replaced. If he resigns, dies, you got to replace him. So, vice president goes, you got to fill that spot. Okay, president just picks somebody else. If the president is declared unable to run the country, this is how we can tell. Okay, if President Biden right now wanted to step down, resign in writing, and he were unable to write that resignation, then we know he's not fit. Does that make sense? Did I word that okay with you? Okay. Or if the majority of the cabinet, so there's 15 cabinet departments, from Secretary of State down to Homeland Security. If 8 of the cabinet decide that the president is unfit, they can vote to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, the president can appeal that to Congress, and then Congress will decide who's right. Okay? But I'll tell you this, guys, the 25th Amendment, if it was in place during the Wilson administration, it would have been needed to be invoked. Okay? After the strokes that he suffered the last year. Reagan, in his last few months as president, had the onset of Alzheimer's. Okay, it was noticeable. It wasn't real bad, but it was noticeable. Okay, so there could have been some discussions there about the 25th Amendment with Reagan, although he was finishing his second term. They didn't push the envelopes there. Okay, there's your cabinet members in order in your notes. Okay. And then I'm down to I got 7%. Okay. So let me just talk. These cabinet departments are also known as executive departments. Okay. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys yesterday. I talked about the guy from Venezuela that took 21 of these departments and condensed them to 9.
Yeah.
With the stroke of a pen. Okay. Now, let me just go over real quick what some of these, all of these do. Okay, so all of them are called secretary except for the attorney general, who's the head of the Department of Justice. Okay, so Secretary of State is diplomacy. All right, so dealing with, let's say the King of England is coming. I think we've talked about this, like the protocols, speeches. Maybe I didn't talk about this. Let me give you an example. You guys ever heard this line from a speech? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Ever heard those words? That was Reagan standing at the Berlin Wall. Okay? That speech was given to the State Department. And they said, Mr. President, you don't want to say that line. It's too provocative. You're going to piss off the Russians. You're going to start a war. They took it out. Reagan put it back in. That's what the State Department is. It's all about diplomacy, okay? It's about, making sure, like, if you're going to Japan as the president, you know what the culture expects, okay? You don't do certain things in Japan. Okay? You bow. These things. Okay. Treasury. Okay, so the head of the Treasury, this is where we print our money, okay? They're in charge of money supply. All right, so we also have Treasury notes, which are bonds, so U.S. bonds. Okay, so we sell these bonds to ourselves, print the money, buy the bonds from ourselves. This increases our national debt. Okay. Now, Secretary of Defense, this is the head of the Pentagon. Okay, so the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and let's not forget the Space Force. The Attorney General, Department of Justice, the FBI is under the umbrella of the Justice Department, as are other, there's civil rights divisions of the Justice Department, a lot of different places in there, okay? The Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer of the nation, okay? They enforce federal law. Secretary of the Interior does not decorate the White House. 5%. Secretary of the Interior is in charge of federal lands, national parks, national forests. Okay, our federal government will lease federal lands to ranchers. for cattle to just graze on. They will lease federal lands to oil companies to look for oil, natural gas, and so forth. Okay, and then generally it protects these areas. Okay, conservation. Secretary of Agriculture, kind of self-explanatory. I will tell you this: things like food stamps. You guys familiar with food stamps? That is all done through the Department of Agriculture. School lunches, free and reduced lunches, school lunches in general is funded through the Department of Agriculture. Okay. Commerce. Okay, so this is one that Mr. Ebright feels like, okay, we don't need. Okay. So Boeing, for instance, is a huge company that builds passenger aircraft, right? Who's the biggest competitor of Boeing on this planet? It's a different country plane that makes planes. Airbus. No, China buys Boeing planes and planes from Airbus, which is French. Okay. Then in Brazil they have Bombardier. Okay. We have here too. We have Airbus in Wichita as well because we have a very knowledgeable population on building planes in the city. Okay, so Airbus has opened up shop here as well. Okay, so guys, in France, they have universal health care. Yes, the government pays for people's health care. Boeing, its employees, Boeing funds the health care of the employees, which is expensive. So Boeing's trying to compete internationally with Airbus, but Airbus is gifted free health care for all their employees by the government. You see the difference? It's more expensive for Boeing to make planes than it is for Airbus to make. Now, the French have all kinds of like vacation and leave for their people. You know, I mean, like you can take a month. You know, you're working at Airbus in Paris, and I'm out this month on holiday. Okay, it's crazy. My wife does work with European contractors and stuff in Italy and Belgium. She says you can't get anything done. Like this person's gone, like for a month. You know, like the person I need to talk to. It's crazy. Okay. Anyway, so the Commerce tries to balance that. We have something called the Import and Export Bank. They do that kind of stuff. Really help out our big businesses. Okay. Secretary of Labor deals with things like minimum wage, any type of labor fights with working conditions, strikes, that sort of thing. Health and Human Services, kind of self-explanatory. Housing and Urban Development, guys, we're talking about like Section 8 housing, zoning issues. I don't know if you guys have heard of things like redlining, which is kind of a racial thing. Guys, when you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, white neighborhoods did not want black people to move into their neighborhoods. Okay, so there was this thing called redlining in a lot of our cities. Okay, it's really BS. Okay, it was wrong. It had to be fixed. But housing, urban development kind of deal with those issues, and Section 8, which is government subsidized housing, the projects, housing in big cities, and so forth. Okay, transportation kind of self-explanatory. Airports, roads, bridges, all of it. Energy. This is another one, guys. Personally, I feel like we could definitely fold this one into a different agency and do away with it. It's a huge bureaucracy. Not sure we need it. Education, same thing. Why do we have to have this? Let's fold some of these in. Now, obviously, guys, in order to do that, you're going to need a very bold president that has a lot of support to do something like this. Veterans Affairs, this is important. This is our VA hospitals, pensions for our veterans, all this kind of stuff, PTSD problems, all of it, okay? And then Homeland Security folds in the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all report to Homeland Security, the border patrol, all of that, okay? That came about after 9/11. The airports, the TSA, that's part of Homeland Security. and so forth. Good? I'm gonna turn this off because it's about to end.